February 14th, 2020, the body of Thomas Laurent, 39, was discovered in the presidential suite of the Hôtel Royal, one of Paris's most exclusive accommodations, where rooms command upwards of $6,000 per night. The corporate lawyer had been stabbed repeatedly with a pair of antique silver scissors that investigators would later confirm belonged to the hotel's Louis XVI writing desk. His wife, Camille Laurent, 30s, a prominent figure in Paris's contemporary art scene and owner of the prestigious Galerie Laurent in the Marais district, was found beside the body, her hands bloodied and her designer dress ruined beyond salvage. Initial reports suggested a violent altercation during what was meant to be a lavish Valentine's Day celebration. But as detectives from the Brigade Criminelle delved deeper, they uncovered a Byzantine tale of betrayal, more complex than any canvas hanging in Camille's gallery. What emerged was evidence of a long-running affair between Thomas and Camille's identical twin sister, Sophie Laurent, alongside a meticulously documented plan to defraud Galerie Laurent of several priceless works entrusted to Camille by some of France's most celebrated contemporary artists. The romantic Paris getaway, investigators would discover, was never intended as a reconciliation, but rather an elaborately staged opportunity for Camille to eliminate her husband after discovering the dual treachery of the two people she had trusted most. The February morning dawned gray and dismal over Paris, a light freezing rain casting a crystalline sheen over the cobblestones and ornate facades of the 8th arrondissement. Inside the Hôtel Royal's presidential suite, the opulent surroundings, crystal chandeliers, gilded Louis XV furniture, and walls adorned with museum-quality artworks on loan from the Musée d'Orsay, created a jarring contrast to the violence that had unfolded hours earlier. The white marble floor of the bathroom now bore streaks of crimson, where Camille had apparently tried to wash Thomas's blood from her hands, leaving behind partial footprints that tracked a macabre path from the bedroom to the sink. Madame Laurent discovered her husband unresponsive around 2:30 this morning, explained Monsieur Beaumont, the hotel's visibly shaken night manager, his voice barely audible above the quiet efficiency of the forensics team documenting the scene. She called the front desk in a state of extreme distress. Our security personnel responded immediately, followed by emergency services. But Monsieur Laurent was clearly beyond help. The night manager's gaze drifted to the bedroom, where Thomas's body remained sprawled across the blood-soaked sheets, his expression frozen in what appeared to be shock rather than fear. The face of a man who could not believe his fate, even as it overtook him. Camille herself presented a study in controlled devastation as she sat in a plush armchair in the suite salon, separated from her husband's body by a set of double doors and a team of investigators. Her striking features, high cheekbones, almond-shaped green eyes, and the distinctive Laurent family jawline remained composed, though her complexion had taken on the pallor of fine porcelain. Still dressed in her blood-stained Dior evening gown, she responded to initial questions with unsettling precision. "We had dinner at L'Ambroisie," she explained to the first officers on the scene, her voice steady. Despite her apparent shock, Thomas received a call during dessert that agitated him. "When we returned to the hotel, we argued. He became physically threatening. I defended myself." The simplicity of her account, delivered with the same analytical clarity she might use when appraising a new acquisition for her gallery, immediately struck Detective Chief Inspector Antoine Vasseur as performative rather than authentic. The suite told a more complex story than Camille's straightforward claim of self-defense. A half-empty bottle of 1982 Chateau Lafite Rothschild stood open on the antique writing desk, alongside two glasses, one smudged with Camille's signature shade of Chanel lipstick, the other bearing traces of what appeared to be a different cosmetic entirely. A man's platinum wedding band had been placed with deliberate precision atop a folded note, its contents obscured by a small, elegantly wrapped gift box that forensics would later find contained a vintage Cartier love bracelet. Most puzzling to investigators was The state of the bedroom, which showed signs of both romantic preparation. Rose petals scattered across the turned-down bed, candles burned to varying heights, and extreme violence, with blood spatter indicating multiple strikes, delivered with methodical rather than frenzied force. As dawn broke over Paris, and Thomas's body was finally removed from the suite, DCI Vasseur observed Camille through narrowed eyes, noting how her gaze followed a specific blood pattern on the wall, a distinctive arcing spray that suggested the attack had continued well after the victim was incapacitated. "Madame Laurent," he said quietly, interrupting her apparent study of the evidence. "You mentioned self-defense, yet the medical examiner has counted 17 separate wounds, many delivered from behind." Camille's response was a masterpiece of ambiguity, her voice soft. "Numbers are irrelevant, detective. In matters of survival, one does what is necessary, as in art. It is the intention that matters, not the execution." The Brigade Criminelle established a command post in a small conference room 2 floors below the crime scene, where DCI Vasseur assembled his team. "This is not a simple crime of passion," he informed them, pinning crime scene photographs to a hastily arranged board. "The level of violence suggests premeditation, disguised as emotional response. We're looking at homicide, not manslaughter, regardless of Madame Laurent's claims." The first evidence contradicting Camille's self-defense narrative came from the hotel's sophisticated security system. Camera footage showed the Laurents returning from dinner at 10:17 p.m., appearing cordial if not affectionate. More revealing was footage captured at 11:42 p.m., showing Sophie Laurent, identical to Camille, save for a small crescent-shaped scar near her right eyebrow, entering the hotel through a service entrance and taking the staff elevator to the floor below the presidential suite. She remained in the building until 1:36 a.m., never appearing on cameras that would have shown her entering or leaving the Laurents' suite, yet somehow vanishing from the property without using any monitored exit. The twin sister is key, Vasseur noted, studying the timestamp. Sophie Laurent is currently Camille's business partner at the gallery, though sources in the art world suggest their relationship has been strained for months. "We need to locate her immediately. The hotel suite yield further inconsistencies. Forensic technicians discovered a powdered residue in both wine glasses that preliminary tests identified as a powerful sedative. Yet toxicology results from Thomas's body showed no traces of the drug in his system. More curious still, the blood-stained scissors had been wiped clean of fingerprints, except for a single partial print that didn't match either Thomas or Camille. Someone went to considerable effort to stage this scene, observed Lieutenant Mathieu, the team's forensic specialist. The blood spatter patterns don't align with Madame Laurent's description of events. The primary attack occurred while the victim was seated at the desk, not during a physical confrontation by the bed as she claimed. Interviews with hotel staff proved particularly illuminating. A room service waiter reported delivering a specific bottle of wine at 11:30 p.m., requested by Madame Laurent personally, and to be handled only by himself, not placed by standard service. The concierge mentioned arranging a last-minute booking for the presidential suite 3 days earlier, noting that while the reservation was in both Laurent's names, it was Madame who had insisted on this specific suite, despite its limited availability. She was most particular about the suite's features, the concierge recalled. She asked detailed questions about the service corridors, the staff elevator access, and whether the suite's private terrace connected to any adjacent rooms. At the time, I assumed she was concerned about privacy given Monsieur Laurent's high-profile legal work. The most damning evidence came from Thomas Laurent's phone, recovered from inside the suite's safe, while the device was locked. Notifications visible on the screen included a message from me received at 9:33 p.m. Everything prepared. She suspects nothing. Midnight as planned. The phone's cloud backup, obtained through a warrant, revealed hundreds of messages between Thomas and Sophie, dating back nearly 18 months, detailing both their affair and an elaborate scheme to appropriate several valuable pieces from Galerie Laurent's collection. We found motive, Vasseur announced to his team, displaying key messages on a monitor. Thomas and Sophie planned to abscond with artworks valued at approximately $25 million. Pieces technically owned by the gallery, but which could be transported and sold through certain channels with the right documentation that Thomas, as the gallery's legal counsel, could provide. The investigation took a dramatic turn when officers dispatched to Sophie Laurent's apartment in the 16th arrondissement found it empty of both occupant and valuables. A neighbor reported seeing Sophie leaving with several suitcases around 6 a.m., appearing distressed but determined. More concerning was the discovery in her trash of a partially burned notebook containing what appeared to be a detailed timeline for February 13th to 15th, with entries including Taïla and departure, ZO 600 GVA. While the search for Sophie intensified, forensic examination of Camille's personal devices exposed the final piece of the puzzle. Hidden in an encrypted folder on her laptop were dozens of photographs documenting Thomas and Sophie together over the previous year, along with recorded phone conversations and copies of emails discussing both their affair and the planned art theft. The timestamps indicated Camille had discovered the betrayal at least 6 weeks before the murder. Most incriminating was a document titled Valentine Solution, created 3 weeks prior, which methodically outlined a plan to lure Thomas to Paris under the guise of reconciliation, only to eliminate him in a scenario that would implicate Sophie. This wasn't a crime of passion, Vasseur concluded grimly. It was an execution planned with artistic precision. Camille Laurent discovered her husband and sister's betrayal and designed a perfect murder, one that would eliminate Thomas while casting suspicion on Sophie, who would then become a fugitive, effectively removing both traitors from her life. When confronted with this evidence during a formal interview, Camille's composure finally wavered. "You misunderstand," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't just discover their affair. I found their plan to kill me in Paris and stage it as a suicide after the theft. Valentine's Day wasn't my invention. It was theirs. I simply improvised with the existing material." The relationship between Thomas and Camille Laurent had begun with all the hallmarks of a modern fairy tale. They met in 2020 at a charity gala at the Petit Palais, where Camille, already making waves in the art world, with her keen eye for emerging talent, was overseeing the auction of donated works. Thomas, then a rising star at one of Paris's most prestigious corporate law firms, had been immediately captivated by her passion and expertise as she deftly guided wealthy patrons toward increasingly generous bids. She wasn't just beautiful, she was magnetic, Thomas later told a colleague. "When Camille speaks about art, you not only understand its value, you feel compelled to possess it at any cost." This observation proved ironically prophetic, though not in the way he had intended. Their courtship unfolded against the backdrop of Paris's most exclusive venues: dinner at Le Jules Verne in the Eiffel Tower, weekends at historic chateaux in the Loire Valley, private viewings at galleries after hours. They married in 2010 in a lavish ceremony at the Chapelle Expiatoire, with a reception held at the Musée Rodin, where guests dined and danced among Rodin's masterpieces. Art world insiders noted that Sophie, serving as maid of honor, seemed oddly subdued throughout the celebrations, her toast to the couple laced with barbed compliments and veiled references to childhood competitions. The twins had a complicated relationship long before Thomas entered the picture, explained Claude Fournier, a longtime friend of the Laurent family. Their parents owned a small but respected gallery, specializing in impressionist pieces. From childhood, Camille showed natural talent for identifying quality and authenticity, while Sophie excelled at the social aspects, charming clients, hosting events. They were supposed to inherit the business together, complementing each other's strengths. This carefully balanced partnership collapsed when their parents died in a boating accident off Antibes in 2010, leaving the gallery to both daughters equally. Within 2 years, creative differences led to a professional separation. Camille established Galerie Laurent, focusing on contemporary artists and quickly developing a reputation for discovering important new talents. Sophie remained at the original family gallery, which gradually lost prominence and eventually closed in 2016, forcing her to accept Camille's offer to join the thriving Galerie Laurent as a partner with a significantly reduced ownership stake. Sophie never forgave Camille for succeeding where she had failed. Fournier continued. She maintained a facade of sisterly support, but those who knew them well could sense her resentment simmering beneath the surface. When Thomas began showing interest in the gallery's financial operations, beyond his official capacity as legal counsel, I warned Camille to be careful. She dismissed my concerns, saying, "Thomas understands the business side, so I can focus on the art. Besides, family is family." What Camille didn't know was that by early 20s, her husband and sister had begun more than just a professional alliance. Security footage later recovered from various hotels around Paris showed the pair meeting discreetly over several months, always in establishments far from the art world's usual haunts. Thomas's expense accounts revealed jewelry purchases and weekend trips that Camille had never received, while Sophie suddenly acquired several designer items that her gallery salary couldn't possibly support. The affair might have continued indefinitely had Jean-Pierre Moreau, one of Galerie Laurent's most celebrated artists, not discovered discrepancies in the documentation for several of his works. Camille had been preparing for a major exhibition of my newest series, Moreau later testified. When reviewing the insurance valuations, I noticed that 3 significant pieces had paperwork indicating they were being prepared for private acquisition rather than exhibition. When I questioned this, Camille was genuinely confused. She had no knowledge of any such arrangements. This discovery prompted Camille to investigate the gallery's records more thoroughly, uncovering a pattern of administrative irregularities involving nearly a dozen high-value works. All had been subtly removed from the exhibition catalog and reclassified in ways that would facilitate their discreet removal from the collection. The paperwork authorizing these changes bore her signature, expertly forged, and Thomas's legitimate notarization. The final confirmation of the betrayal came in early January 2020, when Camille, now suspicious, hired a private investigator who documented Thomas and Sophie meeting at a small hotel in Geneva, where they viewed secure storage facilities specializing in holding valuable artworks during private international transitions. The investigators' recordings captured them discussing a Valentine's opportunity when Camille would be permanently removed from the equation during a romantic getaway that Thomas would orchestrate. "Something broke in Camille when she saw those photographs," said her assistant, Marie Dubois. She canceled all appointments for 3 days, locked herself in her office, and when she emerged, she was different. Colder, more calculated. She asked me to clear her schedule for Valentine's week, mentioning a surprise trip Thomas was planning. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. What followed was a masterclass. Counter-deception. While Thomas and Sophie believed they were manipulating Camille toward her demise, she was constructing an elaborate trap of her own. She began subtly mentioning to friends and colleagues that her marriage had improved, that Thomas had suggested a romantic Valentine's retreat to repair their relationship. She deliberately left evidence of researching divorce attorneys on her computer, where Thomas would discover it, creating a potential motive for him to want her eliminated before she could threaten his financial interests. Most ingeniously, she leveraged the twins' identical appearance, a similarity they had often used to confuse and entertain since childhood. Camille began carefully documenting her own daily routines and mimicking Sophie's mannerisms. Studying how her twin moved and spoke, she collected hair samples from Sophie's brush at the gallery, preserved water glasses with her fingerprints, and secured other biological materials that could potentially confuse forensic evidence. The plan Thomas and Sophie developed relied on the hotel's configuration, explained prosecutor Elisabeth Moreau. During the subsequent trial, the presidential suite's terrace connects to a service corridor through a maintenance door, providing access that wouldn't appear on security cameras. They intended for Sophie to enter through this route, for Thomas to incapacitate Camille, and for Sophie to help dispose of the body, making it appear Camille had left voluntarily after a lover's quarrel. They would report her missing after enough time had passed to establish their alibi. What they hadn't anticipated was that Camille, having discovered every detail of their plan through her own surveillance, would use the identical structure to implement her counter-strategy, one that would eliminate Thomas, while implicating Sophie so thoroughly that her flight would seem an admission of guilt. February 13th, 9:15 a.m. The morning dawned bright and cold in Paris, sunlight sparkling off fresh snow, as Camille Laurent applied her makeup with methodical precision in the master bathroom of the Laurents' elegant apartment in Saint-Germain-des-Prés. In the bedroom, Thomas packed a small overnight bag for their romantic getaway, carefully selecting items that projected thoughtful, husbandly attention while concealing a sedative in his toiletry kit that would render Camille unconscious later that night. "The weather report says it will be perfect for that walk along the Seine I promised," Thomas called out, his voice conveying practiced affection. "Remember the first time we did that? Right after we met, how could I forget?" Camille replied, applying her lipstick with steady hands, despite knowing this casual exchange was prelude to her planned murder. "You knew nothing about Monet, but pretended to impress me." 11:30 a.m. Camille arrived at Galerie Laurent for a brief appointment with a collector, deliberately scheduling the meeting where Thomas would expect her, establishing normal patterns. Sophie was ostensibly visiting a potential artist in Montmartre, though phone records would later show she never left her apartment, where she was finalizing preparations. As Camille guided the collector through the gallery's main exhibition space, she paused before a striking abstract painting dominated by crimson swirls against a black background. "This piece is about betrayal," she explained, her voice carrying to where her assistant sat at the reception desk. "The artist created it after discovering her partner's infidelity. Notice how the red doesn't simply represent passion or anger. It's strategic, controlled, rage channeled into precision." Marie would later recall this explanation as uncharacteristically personal for the typically analytical Camille. 2:45 p.m. Thomas arrived at the gallery to escort Camille to the hotel, his Mercedes idling outside as she completed some final business in her office. What Thomas didn't see was Camille placing 3 specific items in her purse: a small vial containing a clear liquid, a pair of latex gloves, and a USB drive containing meticulously documented evidence of Thomas and Sophie's affair and theft plan. "We should arrive before 5, she told Marie with unusual emphasis. "If anyone needs me, urgently before tomorrow, they must contact me before midnight. After that, Thomas and I don't want any interruptions." 3:20 p.m. The Laurents checked into the Hotel Royal, Thomas charming the staff with practiced ease, while Camille surveyed the lobby with particular attention to the security camera's positioning. The hotel manager personally escorted them to the presidential suite, proudly highlighting its historical significance and unique features. When he mentioned the suite's private terrace access, Thomas and Camille exchanged a glance loaded with entirely different meanings. For him, confirmation of the planned entry point for Sophie. For Camille, verification of the escape route she had memorized from hotel blueprints obtained weeks earlier. 5:45 p.m. While Thomas showered, Camille made a brief call from the suite's landline rather than her mobile phone, a detail she knew would appear in phone records. "Everything is proceeding as discussed," she said simply before hanging up. The call was placed to her own secondary mobile number, activated the previous week, and left in a specific location where it would later be found along Sophie's escape route, creating digital evidence of coordination between the twins. 7:30 p.m. The Laurents arrived at L'Ambroisie for their Valentine's dinner, Camille radiant in a crimson Dior gown, Thomas handsome and attentive in a tailored Brioni suit. They were seated at a secluded corner table where Thomas had arranged for champagne to be waiting. To new beginnings, he toasted, eyes meeting hers with convincing sincerity. Camille allowed herself a genuine moment of sadness for what their marriage could have been before responding to appropriate endings. 9:15 p.m. During dessert, Thomas received an apparently pre-arranged call that he took outside the restaurant. Security footage later showed him speaking intensely while checking his watch. When he returned to the table, his demeanor had subtly shifted, more tense, checking the time repeatedly. "We should return to the hotel," he suggested, his tone casual but insistent. "I have a surprise planned." According to the server, Camille appeared to hesitate before agreeing, leaving her soufflé half-eaten, a detail that would later support her claim of sensing danger. 10:17 p.m. The Lawrence returned to the Hotel Royale, nodding to the night manager as they crossed the lobby toward the elevators. In their suite, Thomas opened the pre-arranged bottle of champagne, turning his back to add what he believed was a sedative to Camille's glass. Camille, watching his reflection in an ornate mirror, allowed this preparation to proceed. "Why don't you run a bath while I pour?" Thomas suggested. "You can relax while I prepare your surprise." 10:40 p.m. While Camille was ostensibly in the bathroom, she executed the first critical element of her plan, sending a pre-composed text to Thomas from a burner phone that appeared to come from Sophie. "Service entrance clear. Midnight confirmed. Ensure C is subdued by 11:30. The message immediately increased Thomas's nervous energy, his movements becoming more hurried as he arranged rose petals on the bed and strategically placed candles. Romantic details that would later seem macabre alongside blood-stained sheets. 11:05 p.m. Camille emerged from the bathroom wearing a silk robe, accepting the doctored champagne with a knowing smile. Thomas watched intently as she raised the glass to her lips, but only pretended to sip, having anticipated this moment and practiced the deception. "I've been thinking about us," she said softly, moving to sit beside him on the plush sofa. "About trust, loyalty, and consequences." 11:30 p.m. The room service waiter delivered the specific wine Camille had requested earlier that day, an unusual 1982 Chateau Lafite Rothschild that the sommelier had noted was exceptionally significant to Madame Laurent. Thomas, growing increasingly anxious as his drugged champagne showed no effect on Camille, insisted on pouring this new wine himself. As he turned to the glasses, Camille finally implemented the central element of her plan, adding the contents of her vial to Thomas's glass, a fast-acting compound that would not be detected by standard toxicology without specific testing. 11:42 p.m. Security footage captured Sophie Laurent entering the hotel through the service entrance, exactly as planned, though her role in the evening's events was about to deviate catastrophically from her expectations. Upstairs, Thomas was beginning to feel the effects of Camille's countermeasure, his speech slurring slightly as he checked his watch with increasing agitation. "You should be feeling very relaxed by now," he commented, frowning at Camille's apparent lucidity. "I've developed quite a tolerance over the years," Camille replied calmly. "Sophie mentioned the same thing when we discussed your little Valentine's plan last week." Thomas froze, his glass halfway to his lips. "What are you talking about?" "The galleries in Geneva, the forged provenance documents, the convenient accident you planned for tonight." Camille spoke with clinical detachment, watching as understanding dawned in Thomas's increasingly unfocused eyes. "Did you really think I wouldn't discover it? I've authenticated art for 20 years, Thomas. I know a forgery when I see one, including a forged marriage." 11:55 p.m. Thomas attempted to stand, but found his coordination severely compromised. Reaching for his phone, he discovered Camille had already removed it. "Sophie will be here any minute," he managed, his voice thick. "You can't stop what's happening." "Sophie isn't coming to help you eliminate me," Camille corrected him. She's coming to discover your body and be observed fleeing the scene. By now, she's seen the revised message I sent from your phone, believing it came from you. C knows everything. Plan compromised. Come immediately. 12:10 a.m., February 14th. As Thomas struggled to remain conscious, Camille methodically prepared the scene, putting on the latex gloves and retrieving the antique scissors from the writing desk. The investigation will show that Sophie killed you after you threatened to expose her role in the art theft, she explained, her tone almost educational. The evidence will be conclusive. Her hair at the scene, her fingerprints on the scissors, witness testimony of your affair, and most damning, her immediate flight from the country with a collection of suspicious documents. You can't do this, Thomas slurred, attempting to crawl toward the door as his muscles failed him. They'll know. What they'll know is that I discovered your betrayal, both of you, and confronted you. What they'll believe is that Sophie arrived, a confrontation ensued, and she killed you in a rage when you threatened to blame her for everything. Camille knelt beside him, studying his face with detached curiosity. The twins have always been difficult to tell apart, haven't they? So convenient for creating reasonable doubt. 12:25 a.m. Camille systematically created the evidence that would support her narrative, placing Sophie's hairs collected over weeks at strategic locations, ensuring the scissors bore traces of her twins' DNA through materials gathered from the gallery office, and carefully staging the wine glasses with a second sedative that would never be found in Thomas's system, but would suggest an attempted drugging. 12:40 a.m. Thomas Laurent died as Camille delivered the first of 17 precise wounds with the antique scissors, each stroke calculated to suggest frenzied emotion, while actually controlling blood spatter patterns. The forensic evidence would later indicate he had been incapacitated first, supporting Camille's eventual claim that Thomas had attempted to drug and kill her, but had inadvertently consumed the sedative himself when she switched their glasses, after which Sophie arrived and murdered him in a panic. 1:36 a.m. Security cameras recorded Sophie Laurent leaving the hotel in apparent distress, never having entered the presidential suite at all. She had arrived at the service entrance as planned, received the falsified message from Thomas, and then, finding the access door locked contrary to their arrangement, had panicked and fled, unwittingly playing her role in Camille's precisely orchestrated performance. 2:30 a.m. Camille Laurent called the front desk, her voice trembling with practiced shock. "Please help," she managed between convincing sobs. "My husband! There's blood everywhere. I think he's dead. Someone attacked him. Please hurry." By the time security personnel arrived, Camille had carefully positioned herself beside Thomas's body, her hands and designer dress covered in his blood, her expression masterfully conveying the stunned horror of a woman who had witnessed unimaginable violence rather than orchestrated it. The arrest of Camille Laurent occurred on February 17th, just 3 days after Thomas's murder and hours after Sophie was apprehended at the Swiss border with a collection of falsified art provenance documents, a passport under a different name, and a notebook containing details of both the affair and the planned art theft. The evidence appeared overwhelming. Sophie had been caught fleeing the country after her lover's murder, possessing materials directly connecting her to both Thomas and the planned crime against Galerie Laurent. The case took an unexpected turn when forensic analysis revealed inconsistencies in the timeline. The particular compound found in Thomas's system required specific testing not included in standard toxicology panels. Testing that was only conducted after investigators discovered Camille's research into undetectable poisons on her laptop. This discovery, combined with the methodical placement of evidence that seemed too perfect in its incrimination of Sophie, led investigators to reconstruct the elaborate counterplot Camille had executed. We were meant to see a crime of passion and betrayal, DCI Vasseur explained at a press conference. What we actually witnessed was one of the most meticulously planned murders in recent memory, a crime where the staging itself became the most important evidence. The trial of Camille Laurent became a sensation throughout France and beyond, with media coverage focusing on the twin aspects of identical sisters and their mutual betrayal. The prosecution presented a compelling case, detailing how Camille had discovered Thomas and Sophie's plot against her and constructed an elaborate revenge that would eliminate her husband while ensuring her sister faced either imprisonment or life as a fugitive. Madame Laurent did not simply respond to a threat, argued prosecutor Elisabeth Moreau. She orchestrated a performance worthy of the great theatrical traditions of Paris, with murder as its climax. This was not self-defense nor crime of passion, but calculated elimination and punishment of those who betrayed her. The defense strategy focused on the genuine threat Thomas and Sophie had posed to Camille, presenting substantial evidence of their plan to murder her during the Valentine's trip. My client faced a choice between becoming a victim or a survivor. Defense attorney Jean-Claude Beaumont told the jury, when faced with imminent harm from the two people she should have been able to trust above all others, she chose survival through the only means available to her. Sophie Laurent's testimony proved particularly damaging to Camille's case. While admitting the affair and the planned art theft, Sophie vehemently denied any intention to harm her sister physically. "We wanted the artwork and to be together," she testified, tears streaming down her face identical to Camille's. "We planned to send Camille fabricated evidence of Thomas's financial misconduct after we left, enough to distract her from pursuing us, but nothing that would actually harm her." The alleged murder plot was entirely invented by Camille to justify her actions. Psychological experts testified about the complex dynamics between the twins, noting that identical siblings often develop extreme responses to perceived betrayal by their counterpart. For someone like Camille Laurent, whose identity was so intertwined with both her husband and her twin, the dual betrayal represented an existential threat beyond the physical plot she discovered, explained Dr. Élise Mercier. Her response, while extreme, followed a psychological logic of eliminating both threats while using their own plan against them, a symmetry that likely provided psychological satisfaction beyond mere survival. The jury deliberated for 5 days before returning a split verdict that reflected the case's complexity. They found Camille guilty of second-degree murder rather than the first-degree charge sought by prosecutors, acknowledging the genuine threat she had faced while rejecting her claim of justified self-defense. The judge sentenced her to 18 years imprisonment, noting the extraordinary circumstances and genuine danger that had precipitated her actions, while emphasizing that premeditated killing remains outside the bounds of justified self-preservation. Sophie Laurent received a 10-year sentence for conspiracy to commit grand larceny, fraud, and being an accessory to attempted murder. The court rejected her claim of ignorance regarding any plan to harm Camille, citing text messages that, while not explicitly mentioning murder, clearly referenced permanent removal of her sister from their lives. Galerie Laurent continues to operate under the management of a trust established by Camille, with profits supporting young artists from disadvantaged backgrounds. The art collection at the center of the original theft plot was donated to the Centre Pompidou, with the stipulation that the pieces never be displayed together. A final artistic statement from Camille about the destructive power of certain combinations. From her cell at Fleury-Mérogis prison, Camille has begun writing what she describes as a memoir of reflections. Its working title, Mirror Images, a reference to the twin relationship that shaped her life and ultimately led to its dramatic fracturing. Early manuscript pages obtained by her attorney reveal a haunting observation that perhaps best encapsulates the entire tragic affair. The perfect crime requires perfect understanding of one's victim. Who better to orchestrate such understanding than those who share your blood, your bed, your dreams. And who better to turn that intimate knowledge against them than the woman they both believed they knew completely, yet never truly saw at all?